Good morning, everyone. I'm Chris Cole. I'm from the Office of Markets and Innovation at the Department of Public Service. I'm joined today by several colleagues here at DPS who work on the LMI EE portfolio along with myself, Colin Atkins, Maud Emerson, Arturo Lua, and Tanya Dougal. We're all here. I'll be serving as facilitator today. I just want to thank you all for making the time to attend our first LMI EEBE quarterly forum. As you heard when I started talking, we are recording, and we will be making the video from this meeting available after we conclude today. Before we get started, let me run through some housekeeping. Can we go to the next slide, please? Okay, so we've scheduled 2.5 hours for this conversation today. We'll see, how much we can cover. If we wind up, not needing the full 2.5 hours, we'll give you some time back. But we are scheduled to go from 10 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. If you do need to leave the meeting before we conclude, I'll just let you know that we will be capturing kind of all of the notes. We'll make them available after the meeting, as well as the recording and slides that we reviewed today. When you entered the WebEx environment, you were muted upon entry. You should be able to unmute yourself now, but we ask that you refrain from unmuting yourself until we have time in the agenda for conversation. And so, as facilitator, I will let you all know when that is possible. With respect to asking questions, please use the Q&A feature within the WebEx environment. There is a chat box. The chat box is not actively monitored by our team. So if you do, have a question for any of the presenters, please drop it into the Q&A feature, or just raise your hand, and so we'll acknowledge you, and your question when the time is right. Lastly, as I mentioned, we will make all the materials from today's conversation available afterwards. If you're looking for them after the meeting, we will send out an email to all of those who are registered. But for future reference, any materials that are relevant to the low and moderate income energy efficiency and building electrification portfolio or programs are filed within the DPS DMM, the document master management system, case number 25M0249. And if we have a little time later today, we could show you how to actually go in and access DMM. Okay. Can we go to the next slide, please? So before we get into the substance of today's conversation, I want to share some reminders. We want to make sure we have a productive and informative conversation today. So we have some reminders for ensuring that we are going to have a productive conversation. So as we mentioned at the outset, this meeting is being recorded. So this conversation is public. It'll be accessible by folks who are not in the meeting today. So please make sure you're comfortable with whatever your conversation being, that it'll be made public. When you do have a question and you are speaking, please share your name. Let us know who you are and what your affiliation is. What organization you represent, for instance, before speaking. We have nearly 200 people registered for this meeting today. So we really want to ensure that we're being respectful of our fellow participants, as well as the presenters, right? So there's a lot of content that we want to talk through today. We want to make sure we're answering your questions, but we also need for you all to be respectful in terms of the time that you take up with your questions and comments. So we'd like to make sure everybody's mindful of the fact that because we have so many folks, that we do want you to share space for other participants. So step up and step back. So if you've had a chance to speak and you're kind of finding yourself kind of having a lot to say, but be mindful and maybe give another participant a chance to ask a question before you keep going. Lastly, be present and active, right? So we have a lot of content we want to talk through. We want to review some history here kind of at the outset, but we will be talking about some new material and setting some expectations for what's to come with the LMI EE portfolio. So we want to make sure that you're all able to capture that and can use it as necessary. Okay, next slide. So we have a few goals that we've identified for the conversation today, right? So first off, we want to review and discuss the transition from the Clean Energy Fund and New Efficiency New York funding cycles to the low and moderate income energy efficiency and building electrification portfolio. We want to explore opportunities for increasing the impact of the programs that are administered under this portfolio. We want to identify and discuss emerging issues related to the LMI market segment. We also want to speak a little bit about, how you all can engage with these programs. So whether it be through the quarterly forums, which we're kicking off today, or through the engagement channels that the individual program administrators have set up. And then we also want to discuss, how these forums can be most helpful and useful for you all, right? You're here because you are interested in this topic, you work in the field, and we want to make sure that the space that we're creating is conducive to meeting the needs that you all have as well. Maybe I'll kind of offer up if folks have other goals for today that are not reflected on the slide, drop it in the Q&A and let us know, and we'll work to address those goals if we can. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so today's agenda, I kind of mentioned this at the outset, but we have a bit of a potpourri of topics that we wanted to cover, right? So once introductions are wrapped up, which will just be another moment here, we want to talk more about the quarterly forums and kind of lay out kind of what they're intended to be, what they aren't, and answer any questions that you have about that. We also want to talk through the different ways that you can engage in the LMI EE programs. We want to highlight what has happened with the closeout of the Clean Energy Fund and New Efficiency New York, as I mentioned. And then we want to talk about upcoming forums and the topics that we would look to cover. If you have any questions related to the agenda or other topics that you want to cover, just drop it in the Q&A and we'll do our best to address those today. Okay, next slide. Okay, so let's kick off the conversation today with a brief kind of overview of the LMI, the low to moderate income energy efficiency and building electrification quarterly forums. We at the Department of Public Service look at these forums as a key component of the performance management process for the low and moderate income EEBE programs. As a reminder, the May 2025 order from the Public Service Commission called for DPS staff to develop a process by which we can help to ensure that the objectives that the commission has for this LMI portfolio are achieved. And when we're thinking about performance management, we're essentially talking about a process of continuous improvement, right? So we're looking at ways to measure progress towards the objectives and goals that we have for these programs. We're kind of grounding this work in transparency, right? So we want to make sure that those of you who are interested in how these programs are working have a clear line of sight into what's working, what's not working, how the programs are doing. Um, Increased communications, right? We want to make sure you're able to find information on programs or on the Department of Public Service, activities related to these programs. And then, as important as transparency and kind of measuring progress, we really want to foster better discussion around the progress of these programs and portfolio, right? So we're kind of looking at the forum as a way to bring together multiple different perspectives from different stakeholders. So whether you're administering programs, you're doing work in the field, whether you're connecting households to these customers, or you're studying these programs, we think everybody's voice is important, and I think the collective perspectives that we bring will help to ensure we're improving the ultimate kind of product with respect to the programs that we're talking about today. So we see the forums as a way to really address this by improving awareness of how programs are working kind of in relation to the overall portfolio, and allow us to discuss emerging issues related to these programs and portfolios. So whether that's market-based developments, if there's supply chain issues, for instance, what does that mean for this portfolio of programs? Policy issues that come up. Those are all fair game for the conversation that we seek to have here at the quarterly forum. Next slide, please. Okay, so as we're launching the quarterly forums, and this is our first meeting, we want to spend a couple of minutes just kind of helping to kind of ground the group in what the forums are intended to be, and what they're not really intended to be, right? So first off, the forum it's an open space to discuss progress towards objectives and goals. We want to avoid debating commission decisions, right? So as many of you know, and if you don't know, the Department of Public Service staff, so myself and colleagues, we don't speak for the commission. Okay, so this isn't the place to question or debate commission decisions. If you have a question about what an order says, or interpretation, then we're happy to kind of speak to that, but we can't kind of entertain debate about what the commission decided. This also isn't the place to advocate for legislative priorities, right? So we want to avoid that where we can. This is also a place to elevate new evidence, new suggestions or insights that can help inform the evolution of these programs and the overall portfolio. It isn't a place to guess or assume intentions as it relates to how programs are being run, right? We're working with a number of statewide and sometimes complex programs that there may be some unintended kind of outcomes, right? So we don't want to just assume that an outcome is kind of intentional when it comes to these programs. That's why we're here, right? We want to understand how they're working and look for ways to calibrate programs where necessary. We also want to make sure that the forum and kind of us coming together, it's a place for us to really kind of be constructive in terms of how we're thinking about the barriers and challenges as it relates to the deployment of these programs. We're not going to spend time discussing individual program criteria. Like, they may come up in the conversation, but we may ultimately kind of pass that back to the program administrators, who will be who are responsible for program design in accordance with the commission orders. And so we can talk more about that as it comes up. we want these forums to be multidisciplinary, right? There's a lot of cross-cutting issues that arise when it comes to addressing energy affordability and access to clean energy services for lower income households and within the affordable multifamily space. And so, bringing kind of this group together with all of your expertise, we're really kind of hoping and excited to kind of have conversations, based on your various perspectives. We don't intend for the forum, though, to take the place of engagement that individual PAs, program administrators are doing with respect to, their kind of outreach and ultimate design of their programs. We want the forums to ensure that we're improving transparency where necessary, but we may not be able to cover every single detail and analysis during each meeting. So we're going to keep a parking lot of topics, and our commitment will be, if we don't have the time in a given meeting to tackle a topic of interest, that we'll make time at a future meeting. And lastly, the forum is a place for us to talk collectively about, how the portfolio is doing with all of the parties responsible for administering the portfolio. We're not looking to identify kind of individual, program administrators or actors that participants might have problems with or challenges with. So, so with that, I'm hoping these guidelines all resonate with you all, and we're happy to obviously kind of answer any questions that you guys have on those in just a moment. Can we go to the next slide, please? So with respect to the structure of the forums, right? So, we previewed this earlier this year when we were talking about kind of what's to come with the LMI EE portfolio. And with respect to the quarterly forums, we've heard from many of you kind of a request that we have in-person meetings, and that those are most beneficial as you're kind of engaging in the subject matter. And so with these forums and the kind of the structure of the forums, we are trying to balance the need for in-person engagement with everybody's just schedule, their day-to-day lives, right? And so where we've landed is we're gonna offer 2 in-person meetings every year and 2 virtual meetings every year. We'll talk about those in-person versus virtual meetings more in a minute. But we also, with these forums, want to incorporate some structure to the agenda. So, so everybody knows kind of what to expect, as you're kind of registering and getting ready to attend and participate in a forum, right? So, so first off, we want to have some standing topics. So we expect to cover portfolio and program performance by quarter, right? So we'll be looking to schedule kind of the next quarterly forum sometime in July, which would allow us to talk about the previous quarter with respect to program and portfolio performance. We want to leave space for any intersectional barriers or opportunities that are relevant to the portfolio and programs. We want to make sure that we're creating space to talk about objectives and policy as it relates to these programs and portfolio. And then, emerging issues and topical presentations, right? So we are able to bring in guest, speakers and presentations, especially from those who, might be administering programs in different jurisdictions. When we have in-person meetings, we'll have more time for these meetings, so we could have breakout sessions, and we could workshop topics in a more in-depth manner. Next slide, please. Okay, so before we kind of get into some substance here, I wanted to maybe do a quick kind of preview in terms of what the upcoming forum schedule is looking like. So we're tentatively looking at scheduling an in-person meeting at the end of July in Albany. This would be a longer meeting, as I mentioned earlier, allow us more time to dig into specific topics. We would then look to schedule another quarterly meeting at the end of October to be in New York City. And then we would wrap up kind of the quarterly series for 2026 with a meeting in January, which would be virtual, right? And so for the in-person meetings, we would provide a hybrid option. And when we finalize the dates, we would notice them in DMM. And we'll obviously, for those of you who have registered for this meeting, we will send you all an email and let you know kind of that those dates have been finalized. One thing I'd like to ask here is if you know of any major conflicts with these dates, let us know, drop it in the Q&A function, and we'll try to avoid any major conflicts so we can maximize your participation. Okay, next slide, please. So we'd like to take a moment now and speak to additional opportunities for engagement on the LMI EE programs, right? So as we discussed, the quarterly forums are a place where we can talk about the overall EEBE portfolio and get into program and policy related topics. But not every program question or issue can be addressed here. So we want to talk a little bit about where the other opportunities are for engagement. So I'm going to turn the microphone over to my colleague Colin, who will share that information with you. Colin, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Chris. Good afternoon, or good morning, rather, everyone. As folks may recall from some of our other recent webinars, another priority of staff is to improve the transparency for stakeholders around changes to programs, clarifying opportunities for providing constructive input. And so with that goal in mind, staff would like to share and remind everyone here of some of the broader picture of engagement opportunities into the LMI EEBE portfolio. And so as you can see from this slide, there are many opportunities, that suit, various stakeholders' availability and expertise and degree of involvement. And so, as we kind of look at some of these staff, want to also acknowledge that there's overlap and interactivity between many of these channels. For example, the regional clean energy hubs, which are active across New York State and comprised of those community-based organizations, often, participate in several other stakeholder channels, but are also a vehicle themselves for gathering public input via their regional assessments and barriers analysis and a lot of the community outreach that they do as a result of their work. There are also outfits like the Energy Equity Collaborative that are shared spaces for collaboration between those serving and representing historically marginalized communities, and have a number of different working groups and subcommittees for some of the topic-specific discussions, including building energy efficiency and electrification, workforce development and economic opportunities, the energy transition broadly, and community engagement and access. And that group has a lot of interplay with the DAC consultant pool. Both have the same entry point of the RFQL 4922 that is broadly an initiative funded through the LMI EEBE portfolio to compensate those CBOs for their contributions to NYSERDA's policies, programs, and planning efforts. The various program teams involved in administering the programs, have a number of different groups that are open to a lot of different stakeholders, like the Residential Market Advisory Group that also has quarterly meetings and is open to all parties with business interests aligned with enabling and providing energy efficiency and clean energy solutions to the 1 to 4 unit existing homes segment. Of course, we think about our contractor networks, the folks on the ground doing the good work out there, doing these installations. You know, each have a lot of different channels and venues that the programs are engaging with on a regular basis. Then there's just the work of being out in the community, doing a lot of different public events, showing up and speaking with different program participants about their experiences. That happens in a lot of different places. And we encourage folks to just plug in as many places as you have the time and interest for. We've listed a lot of the general contact email addresses and some of the links to go learn more about some of these groups. If you're not familiar with them, if you are familiar with them, you know, we hope you'll continue to participate and continue to connect. The more connections that happen, you know, I think the more we all learn and move these programs forward. With that in mind, though, if we could go to our next slide. You know, there are a number of forums, and we see folks at a number of these who have shared some feedback, you know, that there are some repeat conversations, perhaps, and we want to do our best to you know, acknowledge that interconnectedness of all of these engagement opportunities and offer some suggestions in response to that feedback, to kind of help keep those spaces productive and respect stakeholder time. So some of our thoughts to share with you all today is that we want to use these forums as spaces to really kind of cover the portfolio performance and some of the sub program areas performance relative to those PSE objectives, and kind of focus first on the policy and program issues that tend to appear in the commission proceedings. It's a great space to talk about emerging issues, and as Chris mentioned earlier, those intersectional and multidisciplinary issues, so that we can collectively think through and develop some strategies for improving the performance and perhaps measuring the impact in new and better ways to continue to move the portfolio forward. And there are also going to be times where we want to defer to the program administrators in those channels to be able to take the conversation to a deeper level around program incentive levels, program marketing, contractor eligibility, contractor supports, you know, the application and referral process, and, you know, questions about some of those specific program manual details. With that in mind, if we go to our next slide, we want to give a pause here just to see if there are any questions, additional context stakeholders want to provide, or any clarity that we can cover before we continue moving along in our agenda today.
So Colin, I do want to address a question that Frank Cowles put in the chat. So you know, Frank's question was, you know, is this going to be the forum for contractor engagement for program design and implementation? Contractors have yet to be invited to the table on the utility weatherization mandate. And so Frank, if you don't mind coming off mute for 1 second, just to clarify, are you speaking to the utility regional weatherization program?
Well, yes, for one. And
Yep.
a lot of times what we're getting is that we're handed down directives from whatever program implementer we're dealing with, whether it be NYSERDA or utilities.
Yep.
We're not really being invited to discuss the policy before it becomes law. And so since we are where the rubber meets the road, being handed things saying, okay, do this, and doesn't actually work in real life isn't really helpful. What we get is then programs backing up, changing rules, frustrate clients. We like to have engagement from the contractors before it becomes policy, so we actually have a process that works.
Yeah, and very good point. And so this forum is a place to speak to kind of, you know, broader policy issues related to these programs. And I think, you know, we really do appreciate the contractor perspective here. And in fact, you know, one of the things we want to make sure we're doing is, you know, providing a space for those that are working, you know, in the field. So whether it's, you know, a contractor or service provider, or even, you know, an organization that works with, you know, households that are applying to programs, to give their perspective on kind of what they're seeing, right, when it comes to, you know, how the programs are working in the field. So that being said, the program administrator, so whether it's a NYSERDA program or a utility, they will ultimately, you know, have specific, you know, contractor kind of touch points. So I think Colin kind of spoke to a couple of them on a previous slide. And so, you know, we don't want to discourage anybody from participating in those, because that's, you know, where I think you will be able to kind of have contractor focused discussions on these programs. So, you know, stay engaged there where you can. With respect to the regional weatherization program, so that is, and this, for those of you who haven't been kind of following, right? So the LMI Energy Efficiency and Building Electrification portfolio is paired with a non-LMI EEBE portfolio, right? So the commission approved both of these portfolios last year. And in the non-LMI portfolio, the commission directed the utilities to develop a market rate regional weatherization program. The commission also directed the utilities to develop proposals for what those programs would look like. Those were filed with the commission, I want to say last fall, but you know, somebody can fact check me on that. The date is escaping me, but the commission, Frank, so specifically to your point, the commission has not acted on those proposals yet. So the utilities, you know, are unable to, you know, start kind of, you know, planning for those programs. So I would expect, and, you know, we have utility folks on the call who probably will say the same thing, you know, contractors will be engaged, you know, in the final design of those programs. And then Courtney Moriarta from NYSERDA dropped in the chat just to kind of, you know, clarify and maybe emphasize. There's the residential market advisory group that covers, you know, 1 to 4 family and multifamily topics as well. So, you know, contractors are welcome there. And then Sam from National Grid is confirming, yep, regional weatherization program implementation plans were filed last fall and then refiled again this year. So, okay. And then just to kind of, lastly here, I don't see any other questions yet, but Michael is reinforcing Frank's point that by the time contractors are talking at the RMAG, it might be too late. And so, you know, we want to make sure we're providing space to talk through policy issues before they become finalized. And so, you know, perhaps, you know, we could have some follow-up conversations on that, you know, with the contractor networks to figure out the best approach to that. I know the utilities and NYSERDA and the Department of Public Service, you know, we've had some really good conversations with the BPCA, for instance, you know, recently. So that's also kind of, I think, a place, you know, not to put Hal and the BPCA board on the spot, but that also could be a place where, you know, we're having contractor focused discussions. Okay, I'm just doing a check. I don't see any hands. I don't see any questions in the QA box. So if we don't have any additional questions on the forums and kind of the scope of the forums, we're gonna move on with the content this morning. Okay, can we go to the next slide, please? All right. So, you know, before we do a deeper dive into the program areas and, you know, have a discussion about, you know, what they what they achieved over the previous, you know, 5 years and kind of what's to expect what we should expect going forward, we want to take a minute to just provide some context, to kind of help everybody understand where we started and kind of where we're going when it comes to the ratepayer funded LMI programs. I know some of you have heard this a lot, but others, I think this might be the first time you're hearing it. So bear with us for a moment, and we'll make sure we don't repeat history in future forums where we can avoid it. Next slide, please. So just kind of at a high level, we wanted to kind of set the stage with kind of just a reminder on kind of where these programs started about 5 years ago, 6 years ago. The Public Service Commission has supported and funded ratepayer backed LMI programs, going back to the start of the systems benefit charge, back in the early 2000s. And at that point, NYSERDA was the primary administrator for all of those programs. Fast forward to 2020 with the new Efficiency New York portfolio, which was really intended to scale up the adoption of energy efficiency, right? So the commission authorized significantly more funding for energy efficiency across all customer types and market segments. And ultimately, to have the greatest impact of the ratepayer dollars going into the LMI space, the commission directed that NYSERDA and the utilities work together to develop a statewide LMI portfolio. And so that was in place from 2020 through 2025, just wrapping up. And that featured about $1 billion in programs funded through the NYSERDA Clean Energy Fund, and then the Utility New Efficiency New York dollars. Every utility in NYSERDA had their own budgets and their own targets for how those programs were expected to function, and ultimately that required a lot of coordination across all the utilities in NYSERDA to make that portfolio functional. At the end of the funding cycle, we've seen around 83,000 LMI households served, which is a good number. But one of the things that is a precursor to where we are today was kind of this issue that I mentioned. We have a number of individual PAs, program administrators, with their own objectives, right? And so in 2022, the DPS staff filed a report on energy efficiency and building electrification, which really was a review of this previous portfolio, and identified a number of kind of incongruencies or inconsistencies between the administrative model that was in place and kind of the expectation that the commission had for a unified approach for addressing the LMI market segment and needs. So that report cited some administrative burden issues when it comes to coordinating the program across 7 program administrators basically, and the dollars were slower to deploy than kind of had been expected. And so that report provided kind of the underpinnings for the commission's action on the energy efficiency and building electrification portfolio, which was advanced through the May 2025 order. Sorry, I lost my train of thought there. Next slide, please. And so with the May 2025 order, the commission sought to make some adjustments to some of the challenges that we've identified in that previous funding cycle. So there was a shift within program administration roles, right? So going forward for 26 to 2030, NYSERDA is the sole administrator for low and moderate income programming in the 1 to 4 family market segment. So Empower Plus is the flagship program there. Con Edison, National Grid downstate, so in the KEDLI and KEDNI territories, and NYSERDA are responsible for sharing the downstate affordable multifamily programs with Con Edison and National Grid primarily being responsible for incentive programs, and NYSERDA providing technical assistance in the downstate area. NYSERDA is also responsible for administering an upstate affordable multifamily program. So, kind of a pretty big shift in the multifamily program area is we're kind of going from, a number of utilities upstate administering an affordable multifamily program to now just one consistently, available affordable multifamily program upstate. The EEBE order also addressed a number of policy issues. So there was a strategic framework that advanced policy priorities for measures that would be incentivized. So really focusing on the building shell, and then also introducing electrification. 15% of the LMI EEBE budgets are available to support LMI electrification. 10% of the available program budgets are available to remediate health and safety barriers and other structural deficiencies. We kind of refer to those as pre-weatherization investments. And then the order also limited the ability to install some, certain measures. So lighting, obviously, with kind of the federal standards around lighting, we're moving away from incentivizing lighting. Appliances and gas efficiency measures are conditionally allowed in the program. The last couple of areas to flag here, NYSERDA, in addition to their EEBE programs that they're administering, is responsible for administering market supporting programs and activities, right? So workforce development is a big area where NYSERDA is, providing the support for all of the EEBE programs administered by NYSERDA and the utilities to support workforce development and training, as well as general awareness and education activities. Both the LMI and the non-LMI portfolios are funding those activities because those are cross-cutting, as you know. And then lastly, the order required DPS staff. So, myself and the folks that I had mentioned earlier are required to provide more oversight of the portfolio to really make sure that these programs and the portfolio as a whole achieve the objectives that the commission has for these programs. Next slide, please. So speaking of those objectives, just really briefly, if you aren't aware, I want to make sure you're aware of, kind of the grounding here, right? So these programs are intended to, number one, reduce energy consumption and energy cost for low-income households, especially those, I should say LMI households, especially those that have the greatest energy burden. The programs are also expected to maximize the impact of ratepayer funds, right? So looking at better ways to coordinate programs and leverage other funding sources, looking at ways to streamline administration of the programs. We're looking for outcomes for both, contractors and program participants when it comes to making it easier to participate in the program, to understand, kind of the program rules and changes that occur in a more kind of straightforward way. We want to make sure we're incorporating feedback from all market participants along the way, from program design to implementation. So again, kind of the forum is one of those ways that we can help to do that. We want to increase transparency in how the programs are doing. Again, that's kind of one of the reasons we're here today. And then we want to ensure clarity and certainty on program rules, guidelines, budgets, right? And really look to minimize volatility in program budgets going forward. Next slide, please. before wrapping up here with the context and level setting, I just wanted to, flag a few of the milestones over the last year and a half that the utility and NYSERDA and department staff have been kind of working towards, right? So from the May 2025 order, there's been a lot of activity happening kind of in this portfolio to kind of plan and position the programs for launch in 2026. A couple that I'll just flag that might be most kind of interest to you all. The program administrators filed an implementation plan for these programs in October of last year. It was refiled in March of this year with updates. So that is current and available in DMM, and we'll show you how to get to that later on in the conversation today. And then in March, the department filed a compliance letter essentially approving the LMI implementation plan and positioning the program administrators to be able to launch new or modified program offerings starting at the end of Q1 of this year. So we'll hear more about that in a few minutes. And a few things to kind of, or maybe two things to update you all on. Late last year, we had a number of stakeholder conversations on performance management where we focused on metrics and reporting, right? So what metrics are important when it comes to looking at the health of these programs and kind of keeping us on task when it comes to meeting the objectives that we have for the portfolio. And so DPS staff are currently working on guidance for the program administrators on metrics and reporting, which we expect to have released sometime before the middle of this year. And then for those of you who have been following, the program administrators filed a customer referral plan last year with the department, and the department staff have been working with the program administrators on that plan, and we'll be kind of issuing a compliance letter, which essentially would allow kind of work in that plan to get started imminently. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so we gave you a lot of background, a lot of context. Some of it you might have heard, some of it might be new. Are there any questions or clarifications or concerns that anybody has that we can address here?
Hi, good morning. This is Pooja from UIU. I was just wondering, what is the total dollar amount that's going into this LMI EE and the B portfolio from 2026 to 2030?
Hi, Pooja. So the total budget across the utilities and NYSERDA is $1.5 billion. So roughly, $300 million a year, which is, an increase over the previous funding cycle of about $130 million a year of increased budgets going into the low and moderate income programs.
And another question, how does this funding goes to the utilities? Is it based on the number of customers or based on their revenues? How is that funding distributed to the utilities, like in their part?
So the utilities, so the budgets were developed in the order. I'm trying to think back to kind of the specifics around the basis for the budgets. I'll have to get back to you on that, Pooja, because I don't have it at the top of my tip of my tongue. But if we can come back to you on that, we will do that.
Sure, thank you.
Yep. Do we have any other questions or, I guess, concerns? And I guess I will note for Pooja and for any others who are looking for more granular detail on the portfolio, we will send around a link to the relevant documentation. So the order, the implementation plans, in addition to the detail from the materials from this forum, after we conclude today. So you'll have access to that information as you need it. Okay, if there are no additional questions, and I don't, if I'm missing anybody, just let me know, but I don't see any hands. We're gonna move on. And I think we have some time for a break after this next section. So we're going to pivot now, and we're gonna focus the conversation on the actual programs, right? Kind of what we're all here to talk about. So we've asked the program administrators to give us an update on where the programs landed at the end of 2025. And in many cases the books are closed. In other cases, there are projects that have longer timelines for for commitments and paying out projects. So there might be some remaining projects that aren't complete yet. But we'll get an update from the PAs on that. And then we've also asked them to give us a preview of kind of what's to come when it comes to the EEBE funding that is getting launched at this point. Okay, so I'm gonna now turn the floor over to Courtney Moriarta from NYSERDA, who is the director of the home modernization team at NYSERDA. Courtney, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks for all that background. Good morning, everyone. As Chris mentioned, I'm the director of the home modernization team at NYSERDA, and my team is responsible for essentially all of the statewide programs and initiatives that NYSERDA runs related to the 1 to 4 unit residential market sector. So I'm just going to start, with a little bit of a look back and wrap up of kind of what we've been through in the past 5 years. And then, as Chris mentioned, give you a little bit of a look forward to what we have in mind for the next 5 years. This is a little bit of a timeline of some kind of key milestones and influential events that occurred going back to 2020. I'm not going to go through every one of these in detail, but I do want to highlight a few that were particularly impactful on the current design and the current implementation of the program, and what we anticipate going forward. I think we have to, going back to 2020, we have to start with the COVID-19 pandemic, as a lot of the immediate impacts of that were temporary. Luckily, we got through it. However, there were a lot of kind of profound, lasting impacts that came out of that pandemic that impacted both our programs and the market at large. And I think probably the most important one, or most significant one too, that is really impacting our planning now, is that pretty much the cost of everything increased in the aftermath of the pandemic. And really those costs have not gone down. So everyone recalls we had supply chain disruptions, we had issues with the cost of all kinds of materials and products increasing. Some of that has come back down a little bit, but it never rebounded completely to the pre-2020 levels. And so we're currently working in a world where everything costs more than it used to. And so that really does impact our ability to use this money as effectively as possible. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Another one I want to call out is in 2021, we deployed something that we called the heat pump adder study. And if you recall at the time, heat pumps were relatively new to the residential sector in New York State. NYSERDA had been running a program, kind of a pilot program for a couple of years that had just been handed over to the utilities and become the clean heat program for the market rate. And we really didn't have a specific program for low income So NYSERDA funded a demonstration project where we provided additional incentives to Empower Plus customers to receive heat pumps as well as energy efficiency services. And part of the purpose of that study was to better understand how, in what scenarios can we use heat pumps to assist low-income customers in a positive and beneficial way. And then also to gather some information and data on things like what does it cost to convert a low-income home over to a heat pump, and what kinds of energy savings and cost savings can we expect to glean from those kinds of projects. So a lot of the work that went into that particular study and a lot of the findings are being used still today to help inform the way that we're implementing our programs, and as we continue to work more towards both energy efficiency and beneficial electrification together. The next one I want to call out is in 2023, something new happened that had not happened before, which is that the state legislature appropriated $200 million in the state budget to go directly to the Empower Plus program. And so we implemented that money. Now that was a very large infusion of money that had to be spent on a fairly short timeline. We were given 2 years to deploy that funding. And I think the big takeaway here is that we did it successfully. We were able to expend that money and get it into the hands of taxpayers, low-income households, and provide them with the benefits of the Empower Plus program. And we also demonstrated, and I say we, it's not just NYSERDA, it's all the contractors out there as well, that this market is scalable, this program is scalable, and we can kind of adapt to the amount of funding that is available to us when those funds are available. So it is a success story, and it taught us a lot about the capability of this program to reach more of the market. IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, in 2024, mid-2024, we were able to deploy some of those funds specifically for the HERE program, which stands for the Home Electrification and Appliance Rebate Program. This is a prescriptive rebate program that is tied to both energy efficiency and electrification measures. And the money that we had available to us, New York State was awarded $158 million for that program overall to serve both multifamily and single family. And we've been able to successfully get that money into the market. We were the first state to do so. And we continue to be far ahead of all the other states and kind of putting that money out there and getting it into the hands of homeowners to make improvements to their homes. And that also had a pretty profound impact on the design of the program because it was focused on electrification. And so it kind of accelerated the adoption of heat pumps as a permanent measure in the Empower Plus program, where NYSERDA was taking responsibility for those heat pump projects exclusively, instead of combining them with the Clean Heat program, where the utilities had some responsibility as well in the low income sector. So with that deployment, that created the opportunity then for us to really dig into making sure that we're doing heat pump projects for low income customers in a very responsible way, and that we're very closely tracking things like costs, trying to make sure that we're value engineering these projects so that we're keeping the cost to put a heat pump in as low as possible, but still maintaining performance so that people also realize the operational cost savings. And then the last one I want to point out on this slide is we deployed something that we called My Energy. So this is myenergy.ny.gov. It's a website or a portal. And the reason I pointed out is that this deployment that occurred really in 2024 was the first deployment. We're kind of rolling out features associated with that website and portal over time. And it's going to ultimately become kind of the primary clearinghouse for information. for the state to share with any residents about energy efficiency opportunities for their homes and clean energy opportunities for their homes. And we're building a lot of connectivity to some of the other activities we have going on, like virtual energy assessments, referrals into other programs, whether there are programs or utility programs, and kind of being able to provide a very comprehensive and seamless experience for New York State residents to be able to get the information that they need and hopefully quickly get connected with the most relevant programs. Okay, we can go to the next slide. So on the next slide, what we're looking at here, this is the total funding for the Empower Plus program. And a couple things I want to call out here is you'll see on the pie chart, the starred areas, the orange and the purple, represent the two buckets of ratepayer funds that Chris talked about. So the orange one is the Clean Energy Fund money that went directly to NYSERDA to implement the program. And then the purple, it came out of the New Efficiency New York order, where the utilities had allocated funds that went to NYSERDA from the utilities to be spent on their customers in their own territories. But NYSERDA managed it all through the Empower Plus program. And you can see here over this 5-year period, we spent over $800 million. We served over 128,000 households. With the leverage funding that we have from other non-ratepayer sources, we were able to basically double the size of the program than versus what we would have been able to do if we only had ratepayer money available to us. You can see our funding is just a little bit more than 50% is coming from non-ratepayer sources. And we can go to the next slide. So with the next slide, we're going to look at the ratepayer funded portion of that pie chart, starting with the Clean Energy Fund money, which got us through 2025. So this is the look back from 2020 to 2025 and the expenditures that we made with the Clean Energy Fund money that was directed to NYSERDA. A couple things I want to point out here is that you're going to see, as you read across, there's some lumpiness in the year-over-year allocation of funds. This is primarily due to the fact I mentioned we got that infusion of money from the state budget in 2023, and we needed to deploy that. So that money ended up being the bulk of what we spent on the Empower Plus program for both 2023 and 2024, and going into 2025, as we spent that money down on the timeline that was granted to us. So this should not be taken as a chart that's showing that the program contracted in some way. The program actually was experiencing growth in those years between 2023 to 24 and 24 to 2025 overall, because of the leverage funds that we had available to us. The other thing I want to point out here is on the participant count, we were asked to try to distinguish between DI stands for direct install. So we have some projects that if the homeowner, maybe it's a rental situation, maybe it's a situation where there's no other work that we can really do on the building for one reason or another. We have direct install measures that provide some small energy savings opportunities, things like light bulbs, refrigerators, power strips, things like that, thermostats. And so we were asked to kind of distinguish between those projects and the projects that we would call a comprehensive project, which would be air sealing and insulation and equipment replacement. And so our tracking systems, it's a little bit hard for us to really parse out the direct install from comprehensive, because sometimes projects move from one category to the other. And also because during this period, we're actually tracking 3 different programs. Beginning in 2020, we had 2 programs, one for moderate income that was called Assisted Home Performance, and another for low income that was the Empower program. And in 2023, we combined them into the Empower Plus program. So 2020 to 2022, we're tracking 2 separate programs. Midway through 2023, we converted that to a single program and a single data and workflow system. So to be able to kind of produce this analysis, we had to dig into 3 different programs. And it's not totally apples to apples on everything. So just bear that in mind as you're looking at these numbers. And then I think the last thing I want to point out on this slide is also to understand that the program has also sort of shifted in its strategy, kind of going back 5 years and before. A lot of Empower was focused on electric baseload reduction and savings, and over this period is where we started to make that transition more towards comprehensive energy efficiency interventions, and also begin to deploy some of the beneficial electrification measures like heat pumps and heat pump water heaters. So you see a big savings on the totals there of gas and also of other fuels, because this is a fuel blind program that serves everyone. Next slide, please. So looking forward, and again, this is just the ratepayer money that you're seeing here. So this is the money that was allocated to NYSERDA through the new EE order that Chris was discussing. And you'll see the total amount that was awarded to NYSERDA for this purpose was $445 million. We anticipate about $386 million of that will go directly to incentives. And this money will enable us to serve about 46,000 households, given the current program design, which again has shifted more towards comprehensive projects and away from kind of some of those smaller projects that were focused just on electric baseload. The other thing to point out is the footnote here that we do anticipate spending about $110 million a year in addition to these ratepayer funds from a variety of other sources. We have RGGI funds, we have the Inflation Reduction Act funds that we're continuing to spend until that's exhausted. And then we have some new money that is coming in through the Sustainable Futures Program, which is still being determined exactly how we can spend that and which measures we can apply it towards. Next slide. And that, I'll just add one other thought on that slide, that our objective here is to try to maintain a steady spending rate of about $200 million a year for this program. And that's what we're planning for at this point. That level of spending is about commensurate with the same level of spending we had in 2024. So last but not least, we wanted to go through a few of the kind of challenges that we continue to experience with the program and some opportunities for things that we'll be doing as we go forward into the next 5-year period to try to address some of those challenges. The multiple funding sources creates a very complicated program design. It's a kind of a double-edged sword. It's a gift to have that money, but there are some challenges with implementing it, especially when we have multiple funding sources, each with their own unique set of rules. So we're doing everything we can to simplify the process, both for the contractors and for the customers. And we're working towards implementing things like the standardized simulation, which is an energy calculation method at the project level that we developed through the Market Rate Comfort Home program. And we think has some potential to streamline some of the data inputs that are needed to process an Empower Plus project. We very much value our relationship with the contractors and the fact that the BPCA exists as an entity to kind of coordinate contractor input into our program development and implementation. We have on our list of things that we'll be implementing over the next year or so is trying to figure out if there's another way that we can serve renters, given that most of the program has kind of shifted more towards these comprehensive projects. And part of what we're thinking is leveraging the virtual energy assessment that we've created for all New Yorkers and combining that with some enhanced energy education and perhaps some kind of an online offer where they can go out and spend money on some predefined catalog of energy saving gadgets or things that they can install in their rental property without having to bring in the landlord. Of course, in cases where we can get the landlord in, we want to do that so we can actually treat the whole building. We're also looking at increasing the heat pumps that are being installed. We have learned a lot in the deployment of the HERE incentives about how to do that well and how to do that responsibly with the low income homeowners. We currently use about 5% of our projects, and our funding goes towards heat pump projects. And the order allows us up to 15% of program funding to be spent on those projects. So we have some room to expand, and we'll continue to work with the contractors in the market to do that in a way that helps to address some of the objectives that Chris noted, including keeping the energy burdens low for these vulnerable households. And then last but not least, we are currently in the process of working through a market analysis to really understand what the penetration rates are of this program regionally throughout the state. And there will be a report pending sometime later this year that will go through that and kind of paint the picture of like what markets where we maybe need to have more contractor capacity or do something different to get more program penetration. I'll turn it back to Chris.
Great, thanks, Courtney, for that overview. Why don't we pause here and see if we have any questions or any thoughts or considerations from participants in today's forum. Those of you who are working in the program or connecting people to the program, any thoughts or questions for Courtney or the team? And this isn't your only chance to ask, but just want to create space in the event that folks do have questions. Looks like Jenna Lawson, you have the floor.
Thanks. Can you hear me?
We can. Yep.
Awesome. I'm just wondering, maybe just a question for future consideration. We use the phrase heat pump ready a lot in this kind of work. And I think especially for natural gas customers, I know we're doing the energy affordability guarantee, but that like ready for a heat pump, like next question, I feel like is asked a lot by LMI clients. Like, okay, I've got heat pump ready, I'm weatherized. When do you think I'll actually be able to get a heat pump? And I'm just thinking, I hope that the cost of electricity compared to natural gas goes down over time, but I'm just wondering if there's an opportunity to clarify that messaging or that expectation for folks, because it seems to hinge on the price of electricity becoming more reasonable over time, and I'm not sure that's something we super control. So yeah, I guess I'm just wondering if DPS could consider clarification on that message, or maybe longer term planning on when we expect people to actually be ready for the heat pumps, like to expect to really implement that at scale.
Yeah. Thanks, Jenna. And I'll invite Courtney to share any thoughts that she has as well. But I'd say, you're kind of touching on, I think a pretty, I don't say complicated, but there's a lot to kind of like that point, right? About, when could a customer who goes through and gets weatherized then, be able to kind of access a heat pump. And so, you touched on the energy affordability guarantee, and that's, for those of you who aren't aware, that is a kind of pilot program that the Department of Public Service is administering in partnership with NYSERDA, that essentially, provides a guarantee on the electric bill for low-income households that electrify through Empower New York, or I'm sorry, Empower Plus, that kind of ensures that their electric costs don't exceed 6% of their annual income. And so, that is a pilot that was kind of advanced by a governor's state of the state a couple of years ago, and we just started launching that earlier this year. So, like, in the short term, like we're really kind of hoping that that is the place where we can electrify households who heat with natural gas, and we can talk more about that as well when the time is right. But I will also say, I think this question of electrification in the EEBE order, it's kind of framed as like, we're doing early stage electrification here, right? Like, so as Courtney said, we have 15% of budget that's available to support electrification. We know, like, the question on electric rates and I guess fuel commodity rates in general are kind of pretty fluid at this point, right? So our first kind of priority is always trying to address affordability first, while also working towards figuring out how to electrify at a greater rate. And so I think this is a long-term conversation that we need to have. And I think your question specifically about, like, how do we speak to this, how do we message it to residents and program participants is a good one. And I think like I'd welcome a conversation on that as a broader group, to get some thoughts on what people think, and we could figure out what is the best way for us to be kind of straightforward with people who are interested in electrifying, but also giving them the clarity that they need to help make program decisions. Courtney, anything that you would add to that?
I mean, I think you covered the key issues. I mean, I think we all just agree, like, for the moment, the best thing we can do for those customers is to get them heat pump ready, to make sure we're focused on the energy efficiency for their homes. And we're continuing to really work on the heat pump market itself too. We have other initiatives at NYSERDA where we're working with manufacturers and distributors of heat pumps to come up with better ways that we have better system designs and more resilient equipment that maybe can help to bring some of those life cycle costs down even more than where they are today. So that's the other way that we're working on this too, is to kind of try to realize some cost compression on the first cost of putting the heat pump in, and also to work with the manufacturers to make sure that we have better performing equipment that's more reliably producing the savings that we're looking for.
Yeah, thanks, Courtney. And Jenna, I'll also mention the topic of LMI electrification in particular is something that I think we want to keep on the radar. And as we're thinking about the next forum, the in-person forum, where we'll have more time, it seems like it's kind of prime for a more in-depth conversation. So we certainly will plan for that, and I'll reach out separately to get any additional thoughts that you have on that topic for that meeting. It looks like Courtney, this might be a question for you. Luana asked the question, am I understanding correctly that there is consideration of how to interface virtual audits for tenants with point of sale rebates for efficiency, smaller ticket items? Is that something you could speak to, Courtney?
Yeah, and I'll say, I mean, the short answer is yes. The longer answer is this is very much in the concept stage. It's an idea we've been kind of tossing around with DPS staff. We don't have a solid map on kind of how we're going to structure it yet. But that's the basic idea, is kind of we're thinking if we can kind of identify some items that people can actually purchase, like rather than just like give them something and try to presuppose what they're going to use, like give them the choice from a predetermined list of things that they can go out and purchase at a discount that hopefully they will actually use. And we worry sometimes about some of these things where like you provide a kit or you kind of presuppose what the measure is that we want to install and they don't end up using it. It sits in a closet or it goes to some other county or state. So yeah, so we'll definitely be looking for stakeholder feedback on that concept as we get closer to a program design for that particular offer. But that'll be a little later in the year.
Great. Thanks, Courtney. Okay, so we're kind of at the midpoint, and we want to talk about the affordable multifamily program activity next. But before we do that, why don't we take a 5-minute break? If you need to check your email or kind of do something else for 5 minutes, we'll take a break and we'll reconvene at 11:26. Thanks, everyone. Okay, everyone, we're back from the 5-minute break. I want to move on to the conversation on affordable multifamily, but before we do, there are a couple of questions that wound up in the chat box that we didn't catch while we were wrapping up the previous conversation on 1 to 4 family. So the first one from Christina is related to electrification. As fuel prices are so fluid, is there any consideration of not incentivizing decommissioning so that the LMI households that receive heat pumps can choose the most economical option as the market fluctuates? And so, Christina, thanks for raising that. And I think, these are the types of questions and I think conversation that we want to foster and make sure we're kind of talking to each other about kind of the different kind of perspectives and opportunities to kind of think about how the programs are functioning. And I guess to your question, kind of my thought on that really is it's more of a question of how we can spend the limited budgets that we have, right? Heat pump projects, I think everybody knows, are quite costly, 15, 20 thousand plus potentially. And so, if we do put a heat pump in without decommissioning, there's the risk, and like you're saying, there might be a positive for a specific customer, but there's the risk that heat pump isn't going to be used. And given that we're kind of still in this early stage of incentivizing heat pumps for LMI customers, we want to make sure that heat pumps are being subsidized in places where we know that there's a definite affordability angle. I think your point kind of speaks to kind of there's a longer term kind of strategy, in a an end point that we want to get to where people do have the ability to electrify and kind of make those choices. But at this point, given we do have limited budgets, and it is a question of like, what is the most optimal use of those dollars? Addressing weatherization in homes is kind of the win, and then where we have the ability to electrify and save people money, we want to do that. I hope that's helpful, and at least to share that perspective, and we can definitely spend more time talking about it. As I mentioned at our next forum, we will dedicate significant time to talk about LMI electrification. And then Frank had a question related to underserved markets. So is there a game plan to address the underserved markets? There's a hub meeting on Friday asking the question, and there's no help from this forum. So, I guess we haven't dug into the question of how to serve underserved markets today. But I know Courtney did tee it up earlier that, NYSERDA is analyzing kind of where in the state the program hasn't been as active, and trying to understand what are the reasons, whether it's contractor capacity in those regions. Is it, are there other factors? So right in New York City, we know it's there's like logistical, big logistical issues that affect kind of business decisions the contractors have around retrofits. So, I think that work is ongoing, but I'll ask either Courtney or Scott from the NYSERDA team if there's anything else that you guys want to say about that.
Oh yeah, thanks, Chris. Yeah, we're actually going to send one of our program staff up to the ANCA meeting. I think that's what Chris or Frank is referring to have that conversation. But yeah, as part of this regional plan that we're conducting, we do we're both reviewing the RABAs that the hub's made, and we're finding that a great source of information. But we are planning to do a fair amount of stakeholder engagement probably in the summer and early fall that will inform the opportunities that the program has to better adapt to the different variations in the market across the state.
Thanks, Scott. And I guess the other thing I'll say, Frank, on that is within the order, the commission, made it an objective, to kind of look at ways to increase program participation in areas that haven't been historically kind of accessing the program. So it's something that we're going to be keenly focused on, and we're committed to working through solutions to increase program uptake, in parts of the state that we just haven't seen it. Okay, let's go to the next slide, please. And let's continue the conversation on program, performance, and kind of look ahead with the multifamily programs. And so I want to introduce a few folks who will be kind of leading up this conversation. So I think in order of appearance, I'm going to invite Annalisa Sikorsky from National Grid, Sam Pastrick from Con Edison, and Sam Howe from National Grid, who will, talk about, where the affordable multifamily program has been, and kind of what it is transitioning to. And then, actually, no, apologies. And then Brian Cabezas is also joining us. So Brian from NYSERDA will join in this conversation as well. Annalisa, are you starting off?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me okay?
We can. Thank you.
Awesome. Good morning, everybody. So I'm going to start us off with a look back at what brought us to today in the affordable multifamily segment. So the affordable multifamily subportfolio takes into account both NYSERDA and utility programs, and this timeline shows our respective milestones. NYSERDA is represented in the darker blue color and the utilities in the lighter blue. So to start, there are some pre-2020 or pre-New Efficiency New York milestones that we do want to acknowledge. Starting in 2026, the Multifamily Performance Program, also called MPP, was updated to include Clean Energy Fund monies. And then in 2019, FlexTech expanded to include the multifamily sector for technical assistance. And then that brings us into the New Efficiency New York portfolio. So in 2021, NYSERDA's direct injection partnerships with the Homes and Community Renewal and New York City Housing and Preservation Development officially launched to provide energy efficiency incentives to housing preservation projects. And then that same year, the joint utilities launched the Affordable Multifamily Energy Efficiency Program, also known as AMEP, which replaced MPP in late 2021, I think it was like November of 2021. So as it replaced MPP closed to new applications early the following year. I think that was in February of 2022. In 2023, the utilities began leveraging enhanced incentives within AMEP to spur project activity with measures we either wanted to learn more about, like different weatherization types, or project types that we wanted to encourage more, such as comprehensive projects for smaller buildings. In 2024 and 2025, LMI technical assistance expanded to offer on-site energy manager in late 2024 and owner's rep and targeted audits for small buildings through the Small Affordable Multifamily Energy Study, both of which launched in 2025. Also in 24 and 25, AMEP implemented budget management measures like adjustments to caps or incentive rates to manage growing pipelines in some areas. Additionally, some non-comprehensive incentive rates were adjusted in this time frame to better reflect policy goals, as well as to manage the budget like previously mentioned. AMEP for upstate New York utilities, also known as National Fuel Gas, National Grid in the Niagara Mohawk Territory, NYSEG, RG&E, Central Hudson, and Orange and Rockland, closed at the end of 2025 to make way for NYSERDA's AMP Up program. Now in 2026, in light of the EEBE order, NYSERDA launched their Upstate Affordable Multifamily Program, also known as AMP Up, and renewed direct injection affordable housing partnerships and technical assistance offerings. AMEEP is experiencing a relaunch with Con Edison and National Grid in the New York City and Long Island territories. And if we could go to the next slide, please. So here we see a show of AMEEP's activities during the 2020 through 2025 period by utility. These numbers are reflected in our LMI annual report that was filed in the beginning of April. The downstate New York utilities saw around 90% of all AMEEP's activity during this time period, and the upstate New York program administrators saw lower activity due to a few reasons. A large share of New York's multifamily market occurs within the downstate utilities territories. Upstate didn't see some of the same local law pressure to make energy improvements that downstate does. And the management and structure of multifamily properties in upstate differs a bit from downstate. Downstate has a lot of large properties that are all managed by different agencies. Not to say that these types of properties don't also exist in upstate, they do. We just saw a lot more diverse types of housing in upstate, a lot of smaller properties, a lot of properties that are managed by smaller property owners or landlords that may not have the funds to make some energy efficiency upgrades or the ability to get the financing to do so. More barriers will be described by my colleague Sam later on, but just wanted to provide some of that insight as you're looking at the spread across the utilities. I also want to note that while the upstate AMEEP programs have closed to prepare for this shift to the new portfolio of energy efficiency and building electrification, AMEEP projects do tend to have longer timelines, and many of the program administrators shown here still have ongoing projects that are wrapping up. So that kind of leads me into actually the next slide, which shows a by-year breakout of National Grid for the same time period. So that piece I just mentioned where a lot of our projects from the previous portfolio are still wrapping up, you can see that reflected in some of our 2025 numbers here. At first glance, they may look smaller than the previous year, 2024, but that is largely because all of our territories at National Grid still have projects completing. That will, once they're completed, that total portfolio count of activity will go up. So like I mentioned, the slide shows a breakout by year for the National Grid territories specifically. As I said in the timeline slide, AMEEP didn't launch until very late 2021, which is why you don't see any activity until starting in 2022. KEDNY, our New York City territory, was able to see completed projects starting in 22 due to some early leads from an existing market rate multifamily program in the territory. But KEDLI and NMPC, so our Long Island and upstate Niagara Mohawk territories respectively, didn't see projects complete until 2023. This was due to some struggles in building a pipeline in the beginning of the program. And as I mentioned previously, this program tends to have longer project timelines. So a project may have started in the program in late 2021 or early 2022, but it may not have completed until 2023 when it gets reflected in reporting. KEDLI continued to struggle to build pipeline, although it is a downstate New York utility. It has a tenth of the multifamily market that its neighboring utility, KEDNY, has. And as I mentioned previously, I just want to reiterate, there are a lot of ongoing projects still in 2020 from 2025 that are completing this year. So we did, over the term of this portfolio, see incredible growth in our New York City territory, KEDNY, and more moderate growth, but still growth nonetheless in our other two territories. And then if we move on to the next slide, this is just a deep dive down into our downstate territories at National Grid, so KEDLI and KEDNY. And as mentioned previously, these are the two territories for us that AMEEP will continue into 2026 with the relaunched version. So these are some high-level stats broken out by comprehensive and non-comprehensive. I know I've mentioned those terms before, but really quickly, if no one is familiar with what those terms mean, in AMEEP, non-comprehensive are projects that have just a handful or maybe just one measure that they come in knowing that they want to do a smaller project. Comprehensive are bigger projects. Oftentimes they have some kind of energy audit leading into them that makes recommendations of what energy efficiency upgrades should be done. And these projects tend to be a lot larger and a lot more complex and have longer timelines. So our Long Island territory saw an average MMBTU savings per project for comprehensive of 222 MMBTUs, non-comprehensive at just around 170. So you can see that difference between comprehensive and non-comprehensive here, where comprehensive tends to have a lot more savings and cost a lot more, as reflected in the next two columns showing the average cost per project and the average incentive per project. So the average percentage of project cost covered in KEDLI was 54% for comprehensive, and then a little lower on the non-comprehensive side at 44%. This is right around where we tried to be when we launched the program. We were looking at some benchmarks for other programs that had existed in the market previously. So we knew we wanted to stay above 30% of project cost covered, and we were achieving that through these metrics here. KEDNY, where we had a lot more project activity, our comprehensive average savings per project was a lot higher. We also tended to see a lot larger projects in our KEDNY service territory. So that's why the comprehensive projects tended to have bigger savings per project. Our non-comprehensive projects did tend to have lower average MMBTUs per project than we saw in our Long Island territory. The KEDNY territory is interesting where we have a lot of large projects. We also have a lot of very small projects down to 6-unit buildings that could be driving the difference we see here between the average MMBTU for comprehensive versus not comprehensive. You can see the average cost per project and average incentive per project here for KEDNY as well, bringing us to an average percentage project cost covered for comprehensive at 55%, right around what KEDLI was. And then for non-comprehensive, a bit lower than we saw in KEDLI. We're seeing 32% project cost covered. For the 2020 through 2025 period, projects that we had completed as of the end of 2025, and for comprehensive, we had 18. For non-comprehensive, we had just over 1,200. And as of the annual report filing, KEDLI had achieved 22% of planned savings and KEDNY at 94%. That KEDLI metric looks really small, 22% of planned savings, but a lot of KEDLI's pipeline was very back-ended or backloaded. I'm not sure what the right term is, but I've mentioned previously where some of our projects are still in the works and they're completing this year. That's where a lot of our KEDLI savings will be coming from. And I believe at this time, those pipeline projects will get us closer to 100% planned savings achieved. Same story for KEDNY, although we're already almost there at 94%. As mentioned previously, these territories will continue to have the relaunched version of AMEEP in 2026. And then moving into the next slide, I'll pass it over to my colleague Sam from Con Edison.
Morning, everyone. Sam Patrick from Con Edison. Just looking at time, I will try to be fairly brief with my remarks. So let me sort of do the best I can to tell the story of what we're looking at here. I think a key differentiating factor for Con Ed as compared to the rest of the AMEEP program administrators, National Grid in particular, is that prior to the NETI period, we had already been running a affordable multifamily end use incentive program in our service territory, which is why you see identified program expenditure and associated savings in 2020 and 2021 prior to AMEEP launch. Again, AMEEP launched formally, officially, toward the near end of 2021. So handily enough, we had something of an established pipeline of projects that could be moved over or transferred into the more formalized statewide AMEEP initiative. As far as incentive spend or total program expenditure is concerned, think you can see something of a ramp from 2020 through 2025. Worth noting, 2024, program year 2024, it's something of an outlier from an expenditure perspective. The savings correspond to that, unsurprisingly. Reason being, we saw a pretty remarkable uptick in weatherization interventions, attic cavity insulation in particular, and that was in response to some needed modulation or change on our end as far as incentive setting was concerned. I think the story overall is that the program, as we implemented it, progressed as we largely planned and expected over the 5-year clip, ultimately resulting in the numbers that you can see on the far right, the totals. So upward of $189 million in total incentive spend out of 223 thereabouts in total expenditure. For what it's worth, this is about 84% of expenditure went directly toward incentives, which is what we would like to see. And then the participant number on the far right, the 436, that reflects, of course, dwelling units served as opposed to a total building count. Next slide. This is sort of the companion slide to the one Annalisa just covered for National Grid. Same general idea here. Of course, for Con Ed, because we are a dual commodity or dual fuel utility, determined to break it out not just by comprehensive and non-comprehensive projects completed, but also the commodity tied to those projects. I think the story here, and maybe I'll jump down to those 3 bullet points before getting to the point I was about to make. Over the life of the NENI period, the New Efficiency New York period, 2020 through 2025, the company completed nearly 90 comprehensive projects and upward of 6,000 non-comprehensive projects. Again, comprehensive, we're talking about whole building energy retrofits. So as a potentially helpful use case here, we're talking about a comprehensive project that's roughly $300,000 in total cost. Perhaps in this case, the company would have earmarked, roughly speaking, $130,000 in total incentive. So covering in the neighborhood of 42-43% of total project cost. A sort of measure mix that you might see in that particular case could be attic cavity insulation, which I just acknowledged, perhaps some boiler controls, and then air sealing package, something to that effect. And then on the electric side, likely pumps, motors, VFDs, those types of things. So comprehensive, think whole building energy retrofit. Non-comprehensive, more prescriptive in scope, 1, 2, potentially 3 measures. Worth noting overall that the company did exceed the New Efficiency New York energy savings target, 27% and 28% electric and gas respectively. Next slide. And my colleague at National Grid, Sam Howe, will cover this one.
Hi, everybody. I'll be brief. I know we're at the end of our time. I wanted to start with some program trends and direction changes. Again, as we've discussed, National Grid and Con Edison focused on growing the share of program savings and participation from those comprehensive whole building projects. For Con Ed specifically, this was supported by a careful phase out of non-strategic lighting and their retail offerings at the end of last year. As part of our program reorientation towards strategic measures under EEPE, utilities jointly expanded and aligned their weatherization offerings towards interventions such as attic, above deck roof insulation, and wall insulation. Con Edison has introduced an electrification pathway, LMI EE, as a key component of their portfolio introduction this year. The utilities also completed process evaluations for the program last year and engaged in impact evaluations, with Con Ed's complete last year and National Grid's expected this quarter. Those completed program evaluations and reports can be found on DMM. Next slide. Let's review some of the challenges the program has faced and the opportunities we have for improvements in the new EE/BE area. Over the NENI period and into our current era, program complexity remains a challenge, especially for that comprehensive pathway. Project costs, even with incentive coverage, are still a barrier for participation. We found with the upstate program, especially, smaller independent property owners were really sensitive to costs. Long project timelines from initial customer interest to final reviews and utility processing were a challenge that we are working to improve. And also the high administrative burden for participating contractors is also challenging. We do know that the paperwork involved can be very extensive. With this feedback in mind and input from the reference process evaluations, the program administrators have been working to streamline the program offerings with a focus on that most complex element, the comprehensive pathway. We're also working to improve communication and collaboration with partner agencies and program participants throughout project life cycles. And I will hand the mic back over to Sam.
Back again. Hi, everyone. Let me try and cover this very quickly here. So what you're looking at is a reflection of the company's planned expenditure and associated savings strategy over the next 5 years, so the EE/BE period. What you're looking at here is something of a ramp. So starting this year in 2026, planning to spend in the neighborhood of $54 million in total incentive, upward of $70 million in total expenditure, and those two numbers rise over the life of this portfolio period. I think a couple of key points to note here: the numbers on the far right, the 366 and the 457. These represent roughly speaking a doubling in our allocated and planned budget over the 5-year period as compared to the NENI period. And unsurprisingly, what this results in is a whole heck of a lot more participants served. I think we just bounced to a different slide, as well as associated savings both on the electric and gas side. The roughly doubling of the budget corresponds, generally speaking, 1-to-1 in the participant served increase, as well as the electric savings and gas savings. And looking at time, I will just hand it back over to Sam H., National Grid.
Across our KEDLI and KEDNI service territories, we are working to very steadily scale the program across the EE/BE period. You'll notice that much like Con Ed, we do plan to spend a good bit more than the NENI period. From 26 through 30, we plan to support energy improvements for 117,000 dwelling units to achieve 423,000 annual MMBTU of energy savings by delivering roughly $89 million in incentives. And again, like we discussed, under this new strategic reorientation, program administrators are emphasizing envelope improvements rather than primary gas efficiency offerings. So the spend does look a little bit different. And I think the next speaker is Brian Cabezas.
Great, thanks Sams, thanks and Alyssa. I'm Brian Cabezas. I'm the lead for the multifamily team at NYSERDA, and really happy to be the anchor on this affordable multifamily subportfolio section. I'll also try to be brief with my remarks in the interest of time. So here on this first slide, I'm starting with a look at the 2020 to 25 historical view of the NYSERDA affordable multifamily subportfolio, looking into the key programs that represented that subportfolio. They are direct injection, LMI technical assistance, and our multifamily performance program. Just to give some a bit of an overview of these programs. In the earlier years, from 2020 to 22, the incentive spend was largely driven by our multifamily performance program, which, as Annalisa mentioned, was updated with the CEF funds in 2016 and then closed to new applications in 2022. So that program closure and the associated project wrap up was really what drove the incentive spend around that time. But since 23, our direct injection program, which is our affordable housing partnerships, those really drove and have driven the portfolio incentive spend. And then for the LMI technical assistance, we've seen that to be consistently strong intake and spend increased really in the latter years, aligning with the new offerings for owner's rep and small affordable multifamily energy study that were both launched in 25, and then deadlines associated with the New York City's local law 97. Those not familiar with that local law, it really sets a GHG emissions limits for buildings over 25,000 square feet. So those, the combination of those new program launches and the downstate compliance driver really helped to drive LMI tech assistance incentive spend. Can we go to the next slide, please? So this slide shows an overview of the budgets and program metrics of the previous 5 years under the Clean Energy Fund, and also a look ahead of those same metrics under the Energy Efficiency and Building Electrification Fund. So as with the CEF, there are multiple programs that fall under the Affordable Multifamily Subportfolio that are also receiving EEBE funds, and so I'll discuss those particular programs in the next slide, but really just want to call out a few notable differences in the metrics that we're seeing here. So I'll start with the first couple of rows, the incentive spend and overall expenditures. So the first few rows are greater in the EEB cycle than you can see than for the CF funding cycle 2020-25. And that also yields a greater number of participants and higher savings associated with the projects over that CF timeframe. And looking at the last couple of rows of the table, program expenditure per participant and total energy savings per participant, those are both greater in the CF cycle than EEB. So in CF, we really saw a greater spend per dwelling unit, but each dwelling unit also saw a greater energy savings over what has thus far been forecasted for the EEB programs. Additionally, we are integrating Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative funding into these EEB funded programs. So there'll be 16 million in RGGI funds that will support resiliency measures and non-system benefits charge paying customers. And those will be integrated into the new AMP Up program. That's the new affordable multifamily program upstate. And then $10 million in RGGI will be used for the new construction support. And we can go to the next slide, please. So this slide provides a closer look, really zooming in on those affordable multifamily programs that are receiving the EEB funds from 2026 to 2026 to 2030. So the funds are distributed across these 4 programs. The recently launched Affordable Multifamily Program Upstate, AMP Up, our Direct Injection Affordable Housing Partnerships, our LMI Technical Assistance, which is really an umbrella for Flex Tech, the Small Affordable Multifamily Energy Study, or SAMES, our On-Site Energy Manager Program and Owner's Rep offerings. And then lastly, our affordable new construction. So all the programs, except for the AMP Up, are available statewide. AMP Up, as the name suggests, is available upstate only. The programs really differ in the intervention and spend per project. Maybe just to give a little bit more color into these programs. LMI Tech Assistance and Affordable New Construction, which consists of technical assistance and system commissioning, both have less incentives per spend per participant than the AMP Up or direct injection programs. And that really makes sense since the LMI Tech Assistance and new construction offering are really just offering technical assistance services only, whereas AMP Up and direct injection both offer services to support the actual measure installations, which is a costlier service. And we can go to the next slide, please. So in terms of opportunities and challenges, we kept the focus here on existing multifamily buildings. So affordable new construction was not included. I'll start with the direct injection program. Here, there's an opportunity to scale up the approach to expand to solar, but we still see challenges in ensuring optimal building operation through effective system design, installation, and commissioning. And we have the ongoing barriers with these deep retrofit projects, because that's what they are, in getting comprehensive measure costs and staying on schedule with project timelines, and of course, the macroeconomic conditions such as interest rates and supply chain disruptions that affect all of our implementation programs. So direct injection is certainly not unique in that capacity. On the LMI technical assistance offering, for TA, there's an opportunity in working with the downstate utilities to streamline a customer experience from technical assistance to implementation with the AMEP program, and a further opportunity in integrating technical assistance into AMP Up, the new upstate program. However, we face the challenge in really aligning those tech assistants, or really flex tech in this case, energy audit requirements with AMEP or other end use incentive programs through a standardized approach, while still also allowing that flexibility in TA services to meet the needs of specific projects. So we really have to, balance those needs for the standardized approach and the flexibility. And then in terms of barriers, there's a barrier in aligning timelines and streamlining coordination across different program administrators. Certainly not one that we can't overcome, but just a barrier to acknowledge. And then for AMP Up, we see an opportunity in obviously launching the new program, and this new program serving as a one-stop shop, providing both concierge service and embedding technical assistance into one program. And by concierge service, I really just mean that there's more support in the service offerings that the contractors can provide to the building owners. Certainly, if you want to know more about that program, we can visit our program page. And we also have the opportunity to pair end use incentives with resilience enhancements. So that is a new opportunity and for an affordable multifamily program that NYSERDA has launched. In terms of challenges, we have found that our current list of qualified providers has limited coverage upstate. So we're working to bolster that and get additional coverage. And I think, and Alyssa acknowledged this with her market characterization of the upstate market before, we see small multifamily buildings tending to need additional support throughout the project lifecycle. So we're preparing a program to support that. In terms of barriers, lastly, we identify pre-weatherization remediation, which includes asbestos and lead abatements as a barrier. These are essentially the health and safety items we need to address before we can proceed with the energy efficiency implementation. And we've heard from stakeholders, probably many of which are on the call today, that pre-weatherization issues can stop a project before it starts or stall a project. So for all of these challenges and barriers, we're certainly taking steps to work through them and to ensure that they don't hamper the success of these respective programs. And I think with that, I'll turn the mic over to DPS. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Brian, and Alyssa, Sam for speaking to the affordable multifamily market segment and all the work that's gone on there. Let's open it up for a couple of questions that have come in, and if you have a question, raise your hand. So the first one, Abigail Andrews in the chat, had kind of raised the question about, NYPA customers that don't pay into the SBC and their inability to participate in AMEP. And Abigail also asked the question: could this be a topic for a future, forum? And answer is yes. So why don't we plan on, for our next forum, we'll dedicate time to talk about resources for serving non-SBC paying customers. So I think that's something we should address as a group. So we'll add that to the agenda. And then I have a question from Jenna in the Q&A. Thanks, Jenna, for using the Q&A. This one might be for Brian. So Brian, for AMP Up, do you have a rough timeline from application to approved construction and payment in mind? Just wondering how we can set those expectations with landlords so they don't get impatient with the speed of the project.
Yeah, thanks for that question. So from the application, after we receive an application, we expect about a 30-day review period for that initial application. So that could be extended when certain documents might need to be resubmitted. Obviously, we need to have a scoping call that will impact the what documents we received and what needs to be submitted. But we plan for about a 30-day review time frame for that. After that, the scope of work development is given about 4 months to complete. That could certainly be submitted earlier than that, but 4 months is the time frame that we're providing for participants to get that scope of work documentation to us, and then roughly 30 days for the tech review process. That could be extended if more versions or iterations of the scope of work are needed. So all that to say, you're probably looking at minimum 5 months or so with those time frames. But all of those are really dependent on how quickly we can get the documentation and complete the reviews on those projects. So hopefully, 5 to 6 months can maybe give you a general ballpark figure.
Great. Thanks, Brian. And we got one other question from Laura. Hi, Laura. Is it true that electrification incentives are not allowed unless the building is an oil or electric heat? I'm concerned about buildings that have heating and heating distribution systems that are at the end of useful life. Without incentive, there's risk that these projects will invest heavily in replacing in kind.
So I can address that for AMP Up, but I don't know if the utilities also want to address on their AMEP side. So for us, we're not making a strong restriction that it can only be for those delivered fuels or electric resistance heat customers. What we're really hinging the review and the eligibility requirements on are the modeling of the electrification system and the utility costs that are associated with the pre and post to really ensure that the transition to electrification is not burdening and causing the tenants or the building owners to have higher utility costs. So we will be providing more detailed guidance on specifically the methodology and the rigor, but that is essentially the stance that we've taken in the program manual. And we'll be, of course, just following up and ensuring that all those projects go through really strong due diligence to ensure that these costs are these projects are maintaining affordability for the building owners and customers.
Great, thanks, Brian. And Laura, I think that's also kind of a topic that we'd want to include in our broader conversation on just electrification in this space as it unfolds. But Sam, sorry, I cut you off.
No, thanks, Chris. Brian, handily enough, I think characterized pretty well the approach that program administrators, both NYSERDA and Convened Downstate, are taking. I think worth noting in response to the question, the criteria that at least the company is leveraging for the purpose of administering the up to 15% of budget authorized for EB expenditure over the next 5 years is really sort of determined by the criteria laid out in the May 2025 order. So I guess on the one hand, I'd encourage reviewing that, but in a nutshell, the direction is more or less what Brian had described, and that is, our goal, our interest, our prerogative is to mitigate to the degree possible any sort of cost increase on the customer side, and this would be applicable to both the building and then the end user the tenants themselves. So in the near term, we're emphasizing delivered fuel conversions, and although there may be some project scopes that would sort of fall under the criteria outlined in the order and that we've described in the program manual and some related program documentation, the focus really in the near term is on those delivered fuel customers.
Great. Thanks, Sam. Okay, so why don't we shift to our next topic? And we want to take a quick kind of time check. We've got about 18 minutes left, and we want to, still cover the work that is underway related to general awareness and education and workforce development. So without further ado, let's jump into general awareness and education, and I'm going to ask Andrew Neufeld and Michael Duramio from NYSERDA to cover this. And just a reminder, NYSERDA is responsible for portfolio-wide general awareness and education. So Andrew, take it away.
Sure, thank you. So I'm going to do a crash course in the history of awareness and education here, but NYSERDA has been doing residential marketing for years, but beginning in 2020, while NYSERDA had marketing efforts to increase awareness and understanding of energy efficiency solutions for customers, both LMI and non-LMI, the CEF 1.0 order was issued where really New York Energy Advisor was born. New York Energy Advisor is a resource for programs, offers, and incentives that bring together NYSERDA, New York State, and SBC utility offerings to LMI customers, officially launching in November of 2021 and continuing with support to date, actually. It really helps set the groundwork for a seamless customer experience so that people could find the information that would best help them understand energy efficiency and take action. And as Courtney mentioned earlier with the launching of My Energy, it helped lay the groundwork for learnings to be applied to our weatherization and holistic residential campaigns, gearing up for what would be occurring for this year through the next 5 years. Next slide, please. Just quickly going over past performance. This is the budget information for the past 5 years, the budget for the next 5 years, but really what I want to draw your attention to is the results in the middle. As a reminder, in 2020 and 2021, New York Energy Advisor was designed, developed, the user research went in, gaining insights for how to actually build out the website, launching it in late 21, and in 2022 is when we first started starting to capture data, user behavior, and figuring out optimizations, which would really start occurring in real time. Since the support for Energy Advisor is all digital, we have the flexibility to be able to apply learnings immediately and really try to maximize the user experience. As you can see here, and if you didn't know, Energy Advisor really is based on the foundation of a quiz where an LMI customer would answer questions, and then based off of those questions, the answers to those questions, they would be served with program offers and solutions from the state and from the utilities to help them be more energy efficient and hopefully save money. As you can see from 2022 on, those numbers of quiz completions, that someone who actually started and ended the quiz received those solutions, was on a steady increase since the beginning. And then that second line in the middle section for apply now is the actual number of people we sent directly to an Empower Plus application. Again, from 22 to 24, a steady increase. And I want to note that that number in 2025 went down because we actually removed the direct link to the application while we were working to optimize the user experience, still offering people the ability to learn more about the Empower Plus program and ultimately apply for it. But we were working to finalize the final year of the order, New York Energy Advisor tenure, if you will, while we shifted gears to applying learnings and conversion actions to My Energy while continuing to sustain support for New York Energy Advisor. Next slide, please. New York Energy Advisor saw 1.7 million unique users since its launch in November of 21. And as I said, we have learned so much on how to engage customers and information that can help them that we're applying that to everything falling out of the EEBE order for CEF 2.0. We're using disadvantaged community targeting tools. We're learning how LMI customers are consuming information. For example, For LMI audience, over 85% of users access New York Energy Advisor through their mobile phones. So that insight, just as an example, we apply to our campaign execution, which we utilize users' mobile phone language settings to automatically translate ads into their native language, which then in turn, if they click through, automatically translates the website into their native language, really providing for a seamless user experience and not having to really have them to take an extra step on how to move forward. Next slide, please. The final thing I'll say, because I want to be conscious of time, is that all of that said, the opportunity to continue to fine tune what we're doing based on what's worked and what's been some barriers to try to overcome will continue to shift our approach, as we never really want to stop learning from the execution and implementation of our marketing strategy. The data on this slide shows the energy related challenges that were cited in a 2025 NYSERDA survey of 2,900 residential participants on the barriers they're experienced with energy related issues. So we will continue to utilize insights and our learnings to apply to our campaigns. And as these numbers continue to shift, as they will, we'll remain in stride to make sure that we're best serving the New York State residents, partnering with utilities in the community to pretty much deliver the best benefit messaging we can to hopefully elicit users to take action, drive conversion, and continuously raise the education and awareness level of these efforts. And with that said, I will be happy to answer any follow-up questions, but I want to turn it over to Michael.
Thanks, Andrew. Yeah, so I'm just going to jump in. Hello, everybody. Michael D'Aremio, Associate Director for Energy and Climate Equity at NYSERDA. I'm going to talk with you now very, very briefly, and happy to go into more detail at a future meeting, as Chris mentioned, about the DAC, or disadvantaged community engagement and community engagement aspects of the implementation plan. So as part of this plan, NYSERDA is investing in dedicated efforts to ensure meaningful engagement, investments, and benefits to and with disadvantaged communities and LMI households across the state. We've developed unique engagement platforms and a program specifically focused on working in partnership with communities to ensure low to moderate income and disadvantaged communities are effectively engaged and meaningfully benefit from these programs that have been described today. This timeline that you see here, which is a look back over the past 5 years, really you can see really picks up in the middle stage of it. Following the passage of the Climate Act, NYSERDA worked to establish a specific climate equity strategy that includes the 3 initiatives that you can see shown in this timeline. The hubs were launched in 2022, have since expanded to employ over 200 staff across the 12 regions that the hubs cover, which is statewide, to offer community-based education and outreach and support project coordination and referrals to state, utility, and local LMI programs. As Scott noted earlier, each hub has developed a regional assessment of their population, housing, and energy assets, and a barriers analysis that identifies needs, gaps, opportunities, and recommendations to NYSERDA for how to improve access, in particular for disadvantaged communities, to clean energy, including all the programs we've talked about already today. Following a similar effort that was done for the hub, planning the hubs, we worked with community organizations input to develop the Disadvantaged Community Consultant Pool, which the solicitation for that kicked off in 2022. This is a internal pool to NYSERDA of community-based organizations that serve as consultants to NYSERDA on our programs and planning. The first such initiative that NYSERDA has ever tailored for engaging community-based organizations as paid advisors to NYSERDA. NYSERDA has since reissued the solicitation in 2025 as a simplified application. We have nearly 30 community-based organizations from across the state now available to NYSERDA as consultants and advisors to NYSERDA's work. The pool participants have been engaged in several planning and program initiatives, including the Energy Equity Collaborative, which is the third initiative also shown on here. The collaborative is a dedicated platform for pre-qualified disadvantaged community representatives to stay informed and provide informed input to NYSERDA across our portfolio of programs and planning. Following its initial launch in 2023, the collaborative has been further developing itself as an advisory body of community partners, really focused specifically on community priorities aligned with NYSERDA's mission and scope, and has organized 4 working groups that are actively developing action plans since its launch. If we go to the next slide, this is a look back at our budget over the past 5 years. You can see, again, like I mentioned, given most of these programs really got going in the middle of the period we're talking about here, the funding really ramps up accordingly, as well as the participants. The participants really are focused on hubs, residents and business participants that were provided a range of services and project support via the hubs, and as well as prior to that, a previous community energy engagement program. Again, just in the interest of time, I know I'm moving quickly here, but if we could move to the next slide. Achievements. So really, there have been notable achievements over the past few years for these newer initiatives. I'll just note a couple here right now. The 12 regional hubs have reached, as you can see here, through a large number of events and activities, a large number of households, and particularly noting they've engaged over 200,000 people so far through these outreach activities. And for the collaborative, I'll note that the establishment of the 4 working groups that I mentioned, in the engagement of 25 different community-based partners, and the development of action plans that really are areas for us to collaborate with community partners and address within NYSERDA. We've advised numerous programs already through the work as well, and have also advised specific planning initiatives such as the state energy plan, this action, as well as this energy efficiency implementation plan. The consultant pool, I'll note, has seen steady growth since its inception to increase regional and experiential diversity and representation. And we are welcoming additional applications from community-based organizations, so please do encourage others to apply. We do review on a rolling basis, and have so far worked with 9 NYSERDA-supported initiatives to utilize those that are in the pool, and already have additional initiatives in the pipeline we plan to engage with those partners on. Next slide, please. Again, just my time here. We know that it's inevitable that we will face challenges when it comes to program changes that happen, and are working to improve the lead times for addressing those changes. We've are working in other ways as well to onboard additional services, most notably a large translation services contract, in order to more effectively promote services and opportunities for LMI households in disadvantaged communities. In the context of the collaborative, we are very much focused on ensuring we are focused on what the collaborative can inform at NYSERDA, and are vetting those opportunities I mentioned in those action plans, and ensuring that we can, there are feasible opportunities for us to implement and address community priorities, and look forward to doing that. In terms of the consultant pool, we are, as I mentioned, looking to expand that pool and continue to make improvements. We are launching a process evaluation, so that we can make good use of the pool and the benefits through that. If you go to the next slide, please. Our milestones in the near term are very much you know, I would say, you know, I would say this slide is very much focused on our budget, that we are, you know, going to ensure that the hubs continue to provide those valuable services that I mentioned, and those other resources through the Energy Equity Collaborative and the Disadvantaged Communities Consultant Pool, that we have the support we need for those initiatives, and that we are partnered with communities to ensure they can benefit from the programs we've covered today. And the majority of the funding that you see here is focused to the hubs and those partnerships with the hubs and their network of partners. The balance is really focused on the other initiatives. The last slide, please. Oh, I think maybe the slides were out of order here, but I'll leave it there and say if we have any questions, we can follow up.
Thanks, Michael. I just will note there's a question in the chat from Jenna, and Jenna, we will follow up on that separately. So we have a few minutes left. We want to preview the workforce development work. So if you could all kind of bear with us for a few more minutes, we want to make sure that you get an update on what's happening around workforce development, given kind of the interest that many of you have in that topic. So let me turn it over to Laura Giannini from NYSERDA. And Laura, do you want to take the floor and tell us what's happening in the workforce development world?
Of course, thanks, Chris.
Thank you.
Next slide. So again, just the highlights. I do encourage anyone who wants more detail to look at the slides when they're shared, because I will be giving the abbreviated version of the content today. NYSERDA has been administering workforce development programs to support energy efficiency and clean technology workforce development going back a number of years. And kind of this slide shows the evolution of the past funding cycle, where the projects completed to date have trained approximately 38,000 new and existing workers in the clean energy industry. Lots of exciting stuff happening as we move into the EEBE programming. There were some updates to the on-the-job training program issued in January that made some enhancements associated with the workforce development implementation plan for the EEBE portfolios. In March, NYSERDA launched 2 new workforce development programs: the Clean Energy Career Pathways Training Program, focused on preparing new workers for clean energy jobs, and the Technical Skills Training and Upskilling Program. Both of these programs are open. The Career Pathways program has a first due date of May 20th, and applications will be accepted about every 2 months moving forward. And the Technical Skills Program, Skills Training and Upskilling Program, is open enrollment and accepting new applications now. Other things underway is the team is working on the assessment of workforce training and employment needs and opportunities, focused on New York State's energy efficiency and building electrification ecosystem, looking at the availability of training, the training needs, a deep dive into different key occupations. And that report is scheduled to be published in September. Next slide. So I will leave this for your reading after today's call, but this is a snapshot of the incentives and program expenditures going back to 2020 and the outcome metrics of new workers trained, existing workers trained, and the various interns, fellows, and new hires that have been supported through past program efforts. Next slide. And moving forward, just some of the considerations of how we've been looking to address past barriers, challenges, and seek to embrace some opportunities with the new EEBE funding. As mentioned, we've refined the workforce program offerings, including separating those programs for new workers to really dig in on things like job placement and understanding all of the nuances around preparing individuals for clean energy jobs, and having that separate streamlined program for upskilling existing workers to work with contractors and trade ally networks to really have that capacity to implement the EEBE programs. Updates to some other programs, continuing the focus on disadvantaged communities investments, coordinating closely with the other utility program administrators to make sure these investments in workforce development is connected to the business demand and market need related to the broader EEBE program deployment. partnerships, working with other agencies. And as mentioned, the EEBE workforce assessment that's underway will inform our continued implementation of these programs and delivery of the workforce funds. Next slide. And just one key note about the metrics, the Workforce Development EEBE portfolio is funded through both LMI and non-LMI dollars. And so while we track the financial elements of this separately, the outcome metrics and in terms of training and job placement are going to be tracked and reported as blended numbers. So there's not a distinction there, just the way the programs are designed and serving the market. So the numbers here on the screen show the combined budgets for both the LMI and non-LMI portfolios, with LMI funding representing about 36% of the total $83 million in workforce development EEBE program funding. And the key things we'll be tracking and reporting on: new workers trained, new workers placed in jobs, and existing workers trained, as well as some other metrics designed to really assess the impact and kind of statewide distribution of these program dollars. With that, I think those were the highlights. So I'll I think go to the next slide and we can wrap up for today anyway. Looking forward to continuing the discussion in the future forums in more detail.
Great, thanks so much, Laura, and for the rest of the NYSERDA team. Do we have any questions at all for Laura on the workforce development activities? I'm not seeing anything at this point. So just a reminder, if you do have any questions about any of the content that was covered today, afterwards, feel free to send us an email at equity@dps.ny.gov. We'll be sure to answer those questions. We will document all of the questions and answers from today, share that with everybody after the meeting. We also, just want to take a moment here and thank you all for sticking with us. A little bit over time, but we definitely appreciated the kind of engagement from everyone, and we're looking forward to the next conversation. So what's up on the slide right now is a brief survey. If you have a moment, let us know kind of your thoughts about the meeting today. Obviously, in a virtual format, it's a little bit harder to, kind of have conversations. But as I mentioned earlier, we're going to seek to schedule some in-person meetings coming up and take a look at the tentative schedule below. So July 29th and October 28th, we would expect to be in person. And we'll develop the schedule accordingly. We'll have some extra time to ensure we have the ability to do deep dives into the topics that we will discuss. So with that, we want to thank you all for your participation and your interest in these programs. And we'll talk to you in a couple of months. Thank you all. Take care.